You are listening to the People Centric Podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do.
Hey, people-centric leaders, one of the most common questions that we get as a consulting firm working with organizations all across the United States is something incredibly simple that fails on a daily basis that I'm sure a lot of you have had the question of too. It's this simple question: how do you get somebody else to do something? It seems like such a simple question and such a simple answer, but we see people fail in this all the time. And we fail in it all the time because people are really hard to move. They're stubborn, they're difficult. We see you've got somebody that needs to do their job differently. So I just tell them, you got to do your job differently, but they don't do their job differently. Or you should learn this lesson. Or you're trying to help an employee solve a problem and you see, boy, if you just did this or this, it would be better. Or if you have a friend who's trying to do something and they keep running into a wall and you're like, well, stop doing that. And they keep running into the wall. Or even we started talking about the conversation of like even little kids. Like if we can't manage adults, like look, think about little kids and little kid. Is it easy to get a little kid to do something all the time? No. Sometimes just those little humans are difficult to get them to do something. So we want to talk a little bit today about how do you get other people to do stuff? How do you make them do what you want them to do? And some of that's going to be a little bit the tricks of the language we just used. I literally said, how do you make people do what you want them to do? And I'll give you a hint. The language itself is flawed. So we're going to get to share a little bit with you some tactics that we see managers use that are bad, that are incorrect, that don't work very well. We're going to talk about some tactics that do work really well, and we're going to help you with all of that. So how do you get people to do what they want to do? So on our call today, you've got a good chunk of our team here. We've got Bethany is with us here today. Bethany, you've got children. How do you get them to do what you want them to do? And are you always 100% successful in doing that?
No, I'm still trying to figure it out most of the days that I have with them.
Do you see, would you agree with me? So like I've got my kids are bigger now, and that doesn't mean that suddenly they all do what you want them to do. They just do it, they just don't do it in different ways, right? It's just different. Would you say that, would you say, I sometimes tell people like parenting and managing are actually very similar skill sets. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, and it's very hard. I empathize with all of the managers and the parents in the room that you're just trying to figure it out because you want people to just do the things that you tell them to do. You want your kids just to like do what you told them to do. You told them to pick up their room 10 times and they still haven't done it. And I don't understand why. It's very simple. Just do the thing that I said to do. But it's like you have to play mind tricks sometimes, and that feels annoying. But the reality is our brains work the same way as the people we manage or the way that our kids' brains are, all of that. And so it's challenging.
Yeah, and some of the things like it, you said mind tricks, because sometimes when we talk to people about how to do this, I've had people ask the question, say, aren't you manipulating
Mm,
somebody else? And we can talk a little bit about that. What's the difference between managing and manipulating? Because if you're manipulating, you're trying to get somebody else to do something, but you're also trying to do that as a manager. So
yeah.
when is that good or evil, right? What does that look like? I remember, Bethany, I think you and I were working with a client who was a younger manager, and he was talking about how he was trying to help his team be more efficient because they were wasting too much time around the office. And he said somebody got up from their chair again to go talk to somebody, and he looked at him and he snapped his fingers and he says, "You sit down, sit down." And he like snapped his fingers and pointed to him. And we said, is that really what you did? And he goes, "Yeah, I got tired." It's like, can you just reflect to yourself, like you like snapped your fingers and pointed the person and yelled at them to sit down? And he was like, "Oh my gosh, I did.
Yeah, I totally did that.
That's exactly what I did. That doesn't sound like an effective approach." So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's not snapping your fingers and pointing. That's not the way you do it.
No, and I think that, transparently, the times that, I don't know. Sometimes parenting is a little bit different than managing in terms of your role, right? But But I will say I've been less effective when I have the harder that I pressed my kids and when I've had to say, go do this thing and we're going to do it right now and they're not doing it. And so then I feel like I have to walk them over to do it. And it's like they still don't want to do it. They still drop to the floor and they pout and they like refuse to do the thing that you want them to do. And so it's really, yeah, it's really challenging until you figure out. So I think it's like, I feel like I can just hear other people though on the other side to be like, well, you're a parent, so you can't just be, light and fluffy and let them do whatever they want to too. So what's the balance? What's the balance there too? And it's probably, again, not much different than what we'll talk about today. So
That's good. I like that. So what we're talking about is not manipulative. It's not light and fluffy. Although it could be if you decided to use it that way. So, I mean, some of the things we're going to talk about, what do you make them do? It might be care about their job. It might be doing something that helps the company, whatever those things are. That doesn't sound light and fluffy to me. That sounds profitable. Like, so let's put it into context. We're not just talking about making everybody happy and catering to everybody. We're talking about running successful organizations here that make money so that everybody can be awesome. But the good thing is that the world was created in a way that if you do it the right way, that people get excited about it too, and they make more money when that happens. So that's being people centric. Philip was just recently. I got to call. Philip is with us here. Philip is famous now. Philip was already famous in Springfield. He was already famous in Springfield, Missouri, which is where three of us here on the call live. One of us does not. But Philip, tell us a little bit about why are you such a press hound, and what made you that way, where you just need the attention? Go ahead.
Unlike the 25% of us that moved away, but still very much loves our town, I think everyone should, not everyone, but amazing people should move here. And I think most people are amazing. So yeah, no, I think what we're talking about, the local Daily Citizen did an article. A friend reached out and said, hey, young people who care about our community, what is this? Talk about it. And in it, even I think the one thing, I talk more than I listen still. I'm a work in progress, but I do like to listen. And essentially I just talked about, you listen to a bunch of people who've been here forever or just moved here. I think we all have a lot in common. We want good lives and we want to make our community great. And it ties in, Claire and I, we're not parents at this point in time, although our fur baby is amazing and we love him to death. Coaching him is very different than coaching a human person, though similar at sometimes too. I think when you're listening to what people need and what people want, the difference of like shaking your fist in front of someone and just like, go do this thing now. You could say that's influence or manipulation. You could be manipulating with your authority and your fear there. But I think the first step to influencing people really is to listen. That's one thing I just like to say is like, listen, consider, serve, or you could say, listen, consider, do. And I do think that's a lot of what coaching is, help someone listen, inspire them to consider, and then figure out what you do next, or what do they want to do next.
That's good. There's some good wisdom nuggets in there. Philip, you mentioned it briefly because I'm poking at you a little bit on this, but he was featured in the Springfield Daily Citizen, and it was an article. It was a guest article from a mutual acquaintance of ours who was highlighting young people in the community and what they've done. But I mean, he talked about the article opened up like every community needs a Philip, I think is what it said, or every city needs a Philip. And it talked about like the impact Philip has had and how much work he's done in the community. I know you're a humble guy, so you don't tend to talk about that stuff, about what's in there. But my question to you that's related to this topic is, who made you care about Springfield?
I always say first, Claire. I'm a Colorado native. So when we moved to Springfield, Missouri, I would say Springfield, misery. I hated this place. I didn't mow a yard until I was 13. And again, in the mountains, you have no yards. You have mountain. You're just a big mountain that you go explore. And so the quantity of sweat in the Midwest in the summer, mowing a yard, Springfield misery. But you fall in love with a local, and that causes you to step back a little and be like, wow, this is an amazing person. How did you come from a place like this? Flyover country. And that led to just like many, many relationships. Our team is definitely a reason to stay. I think in the article too, one thing I just said is kind of to our point, like, how do you make change happen? The Midwest gets a lot of cliches of we settle for things, we're humbler than we should be. And I'm like, I see a gold streak in our community that we want to be better at a lot of these things, and we want people to thrive here and to flourish here. So a long list of people, really, my friend, when she asked all those questions, I was like, the list is too long, actually. The longer I stay, the more in love I fall with the place. And there's a list of the 3 Dons, which three important people in my life named Don. Don Harkey's one of them. And I think in that I said, Don, one of Don's and our team's superpowers is engineering people's gifts and talents to then go and do stuff and impact the world around us, which really is part and parcel for our topic of how do you get people to do stuff? One, it's not by themselves, and 2, it's definitely with a plan together.
I like how you opened up by talking about, what made you fall in love with Springfield and care about Springfield the way you did. And you didn't talk about Springfield. You talked about the people in Springfield, right? So I think there's a clue into that, right? We don't tend to follow things, we follow people. So if we like a person, if there's something we feel connectedness to a person, we're more likely to follow that person. So it feels like as our listeners are thinking about how do you get somebody to do something, the question might be, what's your relationship with that person? Are you in a position where they're going to follow you or not? I think that there's a good clue in that. So thank you, Philip. And then we also have Diana Royalty on. Diana, you are one of the favorite characters on this podcast. I hear regularly people say, and I don't know if it's because of your snarkiness or because you tell it like it is or what it is, but I have a question for you, and that is, how dare you?
Who do you think that you are?
Who do you think you are? That's my question.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know.
No,
I
I
don't
don't
think
know. You're going to come in really soft and just make me look like an ass. I get it. I understand. Thank
I'm
you.
Diana Royalty. Bow down before her.
About oh,
I
and
don't
we
know what
do
to
on a
say.
daily basis. Thank you, Diana, for working
You're
with us. I
you're
just want to
welcome.
thank you once again for
You
being
guys
here.
are all so lucky to have me.
We are lucky. No, Diana kind of brought part of this topic to us, and it came from a question that we got. We always ask people, "Hey, send us questions if you have questions on things." And sometimes people do that through the podcast, and then people do that just because they know who we are through social media. Sometimes they know that because we're friends, and we still talk about work because we love what we do. But you want to talk about your question that you got recently?
Yeah. So just this morning, like, guys, this is how quickly we put together a podcast. There is no, we really get on it and talk about it raw. Just this morning, someone texted me and at 6:37 a.m. and said, how do you approach people who are highly inefficient that you want them to see it and fix it themselves? I have not answered because I've been working, but I will answer them. And I thought that it was such a great question that we get a lot, to talk more about, man, what are you trying to get? Why do you want this person to do this thing? And also, the way you phrase that makes me know that you probably have some like narrative paradigms and you're not helping the situation. So I just thought it was a really pertinent question for today.
Yeah, so let's jump right in and let's start to try to answer that question because I think it's a specific question in terms of how do you make people want to try to be more efficient, right? That's kind of the question. But you're right, the way that that was worded does give us some consulting clues. So let's talk about the answer to the question. Let's talk about some of the clues with how that's worded. So we often talk about like mindsets and things like that. But what's the answer to that question? How the heck do we get what's our advice?
I think the short answer is like, well, you as a leader probably could make people do some things short term. But I feel like this person's clearly frustrated. Our consultant head is usually like, oh, well, then what are you really trying to do? What more is going on here? How can you develop them and influence them as opposed to make them? Which clearly there's some frustration, all those things. So I think you can make people do something short term, but to like take them somewhere and build that alignment is a different thing. That's at least my first hot take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my question would be for this person is, have you had the conversation with this person before this? Have they ever actually been given feedback? Because we can't expect people to read our minds or know if they're not doing something well or the right way or whatever, if nobody's told them that. Sometimes we think as leaders that it should be really common sense that they're not doing this thing right or they're not doing what I want them to do. But you have to tell people and you have to give people feedback as well. and then figure out how to coach them from there. So that's my first thought and question behind it.
I like that. I was thinking that too, Bethany. There's a better than average chance that the person in question does not know that they have poor efficiency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't tend to have those conversations. We know that a lot of supervisors and managers of people tend to avoid those difficult conversations because they're awkward. And especially if you're struggling with somebody, you know, the mechanism might be that person's struggling, they have low efficiency. You're trying to encourage them in kind of sideways ways, but not really saying like, you're not as fast as we need you to be. You've got to be faster. Usually we're not saying that. And the reason we probably don't say that is because that seems like that's going to make it worse initially. Maybe is okay, if the person's struggling now, me poking at them is only going to make it worse, so I'm just going to try to watch over here and try to do some subtle tones, some subtle ways to try to motivate that person, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Dawn, there was one time that you kind of did this with a team where I think it was a team of artists, and some people created art really quickly and some people created art not quickly. And obviously, if you're working in a company, they want you to create it quicker, like do it quicker. And so you just sat down with the whole team and you were like, employee A does it in 30 seconds. Employee B does it in 5 minutes. What are the things that employee A is doing that employee B could do better? Like, right. And like, I think the whole team was kind of shocked at the disparity in that and just the wideness of that data, and just sort of said, oh my gosh, like I had no idea you could even do it that fast. I had no idea that you could work that efficiently. Yes, please tell us what you're doing. Because I don't know that people go to work and are like, let me be inefficient today. That's just not like it's not a thing that people do. And so I loved how you sat down with some just, I don't know, pertinent information, relevant information, and just said, what are these two people doing differently? And I will add, in this team, I think this is your story. I don't know why I'm telling it. I think in this team, the person that also did it really quickly got the most approvals too. So it wasn't like they weren't doing the highest quality work. They were getting the work approved really quickly. So it was like, we can learn from each other. We just have to do it. We just have to learn from each other. And just pointing that out was just really powerful. And you did it in such a kind and wonderful way. And I think about that story when people talk about inefficient employees or things like that. I always think about how we went about that and said, here's just the information. What can we learn from each other?
Yeah, and it was a powerful moment because it started off with managers were they first of all, they hadn't been measuring production. So management did some initiatives to measure productivity. And so they were really surprised by the variance. And it was a lot, like you said, like it was like it took one person, you know, I don't remember exactly the numbers, but just to get it raw, like it took one person, you know, an hour to create art, and it took another person 8 hours to create a piece of art. Like same thing, same assignments. It was taking some people as much as like 7 or 8 times longer. And you're right, the person that took an hour, who was the most efficient, was also would have been generally considered to be the best. And so management initially was like, why are you so inefficient as a team? Like, what are we going to do? And their initial response, what they wanted to do was take the people who were at the low part of that list and start to say like, okay, I'm going to send you to a class or something on how to make art faster or something. Like, what can I do? Do I teach you this? Do I threaten you? What do I do? And what we did initially is just reflect that information. We just got new information. So just reflect it back to the team. And what we're doing is two different things there is when we go back to our people-centric truths, right? Our truths, if you've been listening to us for a long time, we've got 8 different people-centric truths. And you can go back and look at those. I'm not even going to try to go through what those are, but that's the basis of science of how people work, right? And so the science of how people work is we know that number one is that they need autonomy, which it comes into play here. So if I take ownership of the thing that I need you to do, I am taking that away from you. You as a human being, just because of the way you're hardwired, are going to resist the thing that I'm pushing you to do. If I come up to you and I start pushing on you, you're going to start pushing back on me. And you won't even know why you're doing it. You just will. That's just how brains work. So if that manager went to that team of artists and said, you all have to make art faster, then what's that team's response going to be? They're going to sit back and say, art is not about, that's not why I got into this. I didn't go to art school so that I could learn how to make art faster. I didn't get into this so I learned how to make art. But I want great art, you know. And so they're going to create their own narrative paradigm, which Diana also talked about, which is another people-centric truth, which is the idea that we all think in terms of stories, and they're going to create a story that says, my manager doesn't care about the quality of what we do, they only care about the speed, which is not true. It's absolutely not true, but they're going to create that story. And if they create that story, then suddenly the managers can say faster, and all they're going to hear is worse quality. So what we did was just presented exactly what Diana said, is we just presented the feedback. We took the exact same data that the managers looked at, said, hey, we just collected this feedback, and we gave them the raw numbers. And we sat around the table with like 5 different artists, and they had their numbers, and we just put them on a table and showed them and said, look at this. Here's what the numbers are. And they sat and looked at the numbers. And even artists who aren't numbers can look at a number and say, wow, takes you an average of an hour to do a piece, and it takes me 8 hours to do a piece. And we said, so what do you think? What are your thoughts on this? Is all we did. Just said, here's the numbers. What do you think? And we showed the numbers, and they sat and looked at it for a little while, and I gave them some time, and there was some awkward silence. And then somebody said, not only are you the fastest at doing this, I would say you're one of our best people that does this. And the person who was really fast kind of went like, thank you. That's nice. You know, I learned a lot from you. They kind of try to be humble with that, and it's hard to respond. But then somebody else said, how are you doing that? Like, what are you doing? Like, let's talk about your approach. How do you do that? And so they started talking about that. And that conversation was exactly the conversation you want them to have, because essentially what they were talking about is how can you be more efficient and have high quality, which is exactly what management wanted them to do. But instead of management doing it, now the employees are figuring it out and they're running with that. So management never had to go and say, I need you to have better quality and faster, because that's obvious. That part's obvious. Anybody who is working on a team, they know what's going on. They know that they're in a business. They know they're getting paid for a thing. You don't have to tell them that. They know that that's true. You just have to reflect back to them what's happening, and then the teams rose up. And they improved those numbers dramatically. The people who were on the lower end improved their numbers to get faster, and they improved their overall throughput significantly just through that conversation. And management didn't have to hardly do anything other than just reflect the numbers back.
I love this story because if that question is, how do we get people to do things we want them to do? We didn't tell them anything. We did not tell them that we wanted them to do anything differently. We just reflected the data. That's it.
Yeah.
And we didn't like force anybody in anything. We didn't put anyone on a pip. It was very simply, here's the information. What are you as a team going to do with that information? And the team collectively rallied around it and changed their practices, used each other's best practices, and improved the output.
Yeah.
They had their own buy-in on it.
I think that's really powerful. It made me think too of this other manager that I was talking to a few weeks ago, and it was a similar thing. And this person is a very kind person. I think probably does a great job managing the team, has good relationship with the team, but was coming to me saying like, I'm so frustrated. It was kind of a similar thing. People are being slow with this thing, or I can't get them to meet these deadlines. And why do they keep missing this stuff? How do I get them to do, how do I get them to do all this stuff? And through our conversations, it was like, well, first of all, like you can't hold their hand as much, how are you managing it right now? And it was like, well, I'm sending reminders for these things, and I've set a deadline for this, and we've done all of those things. And it's like, oh, well, that's really cool. But then she's like, but then they're still not doing it. So what do I do if they don't hit the deadline? And it's like, well, they're not feeling any pain from not hitting that deadline. So how do we change this and involve them in solving the problem too? So you're feeling pain, but they don't see the pain that you're feeling from them not hitting the deadline. And so it's like showing your team the big picture, right? To say like what all is involved here when you aren't doing this part of your job. And two, like you're saying, Dawn, where you guys said, okay, here's the data. Let me just show you the information. It's also sometimes coming and saying, here's the problem we're trying to solve for. How, if it's a deadline or timeline thing, it's like, here's when we have to get this done. How do you want to manage this? When do you think you can complete this by? And when can, what's going to be your first step? And I think that feels frustrating sometimes for a manager to sit down with a person and be able to do that and think through that. But it creates so much more ownership in the process to say, I'm not telling you when you have to get this stuff done, or how you even have to do it. but I need you to help think through and create that and create some ownership for it so that it's on you, not me at the end of the day. If you miss this deadline, then I need you to be able to answer for that and make it right.
Yeah, a friend of mine who's a leading researcher in motivation calls that freedom within a framework.
Yeah.
So like you're still creating a framework of saying like we still have to be productive as a team. We have a goal, we have a thing that we need to do, we have a product we need to get out. But I'm going to give you freedom now to make decisions to improve within that framework. So I'm still giving you, there's still freedom to work within that. It's not the micromanaging. We ran into an article recently that talked about motivational micromanagement, I think, as a tactic that a lot of managers fall into. What is that and why doesn't it work?
So motivational micromanagement, I think the way that it was described is really, it's just like giving advice in a really nice way. And it's saying, what if, we're having this issue, I'd like you to do this, and then I'd like you to do this, and could you please do this? And here's my suggestions. And it's all of those things that are really well intentioned, but it's not giving employees they're not helping solve the problems at all, and they're not taking ownership over it.
I think, yeah, motivational micromanagement behaves as if it's engaged and freedom within a framework. It speaks like it's that way, but then functionally comes across as I'm going to tell you what to do, and this is how you're going to do it, right? So it comes like, hey, what are you excited about? What are you motivated? Oh, okay, yeah, you're listening. Manager's kind of shaking their head, and then it's like, great, yep, yeah, cool, whatever opinions you have, I'm not really listening. Okay, so it's due by this date, you're going to go do this. This is what we can do, and like, yeah, great advice to you, right? As opposed to, your example, Dawn or Bethany, where it's like, okay, hey, everyone, here are cards on the table. Art, we have to get this done by this day. How are we going to do that? What are you going to do? And then working within that framework of it.
So are we saying that it's not okay? Because we talk a lot about like asking questions to help other people get to an answer, which is really good in terms of motivation, right? That helps people. Like I'm just reflecting data back to you and saying, what do we think we should do with that? That engages people. They get excited about that. That's the foundation of coaching, is just asking questions, right? I'm going to flip that around on the other side of that, though, saying, is there an appropriate time to give advice, and how should that advice be given? Is there a time where you should just tell somebody that this needs to happen this way?
I really hope so. I'm just putting it out. I really hope so.
Say more,
Please
Diana.
help me.
Did you say help me?
Yeah, guys, because I'm the one who's more inclined to be like, it's time to tell them what to do. I think I did it to Bethany yesterday. Like, and I did not ask any questions. I just straight up told her what I think we should do. So I really hope that there is a time for that.
I wasn't even mad about that, actually.
Thank you.
By the way.
Thank you.
But I also trust, but I think that's also a result of just a good relationship and the trust that we have with each other too. And that we've been talking about some of that stuff too. So I didn't take it as like oh geez, well, I can't believe she told me, she told me this. And I also know that if I disagreed with an approach, I could have said, Diana, can I ask you some more questions? I don't know if I think this is the right direction to go. So I think that's maybe an answer too, is like, I think being able to say, well, if you have a lot of trust with this person and you guys have really open communication and you've created a safe place with this person to be able to disagree with you, then like, maybe that's okay then at some points to say like, hey, this is the direction I think that we should go, on something. Then maybe that's one time that would work.
I like that a lot. So you just laid out two things where like the relationship has to be there. And then I like that you kind of said like there was a little bit of an like that you were pulling the information. It sounded like you asked something, like you asked for that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had several conversations about it, and then we just haven't been able to like get together. And so I was like, I'm just gonna put this out there and like just tell her what's on my brain, and then she can do with that what she will,
Yeah, it's maddening, I think, sometimes if you just assume that you always can just ask the questions. Like, I think that sometimes when we talk about coaching, people think like that's always the response to have. Like I think about that. I've been in therapy for 3 years now. And again, I like to talk about it because I think we should normalize that. I think it's just like going to see the doctor, right? So when I'm talking to my therapist, there are moments when I'm like, when the therapist they're asking a lot of questions because part of therapy is to help you discover the opportunities, right? So sometimes that process can be maddening. And sometimes therapists are very slow to offer advice. But I think that there are therapists, and I think mine does a good job of this, of recognizing there's moments when you can just say, here's what you need to do. And there have been moments where I've just said, look, I know you have something in mind. What are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to help me to discover? Just tell me the thing, and then I'll tell you if I buy into it or not. Like I trust you enough that you can just say that. And she'll say, okay, I think you should do this, 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 and this. And I'm like, okay, tell me why you think that. Let's talk through that. Like, and then it's just helpful. But it shows like there's some trust in the relationship and also that I requested it. Like I asked for it. I'm the one that opened the door. You're not busting down the door to try to tell me something.
And since I am the most inclined to be like, let me just tell you, I will tell you a trick that I use to do that. When I feel like I need to tell someone something and they seem stuck to me and the questions aren't getting them there, I actually ask them if it's okay for me to tell them something. I'm like, would you want me to just tell you what I think you need to do right now? And a lot of times they'll be like, oh my God, yes. Right. Like, I don't think I've ever had someone be like, nope, don't want to hear it. And so I think asking permission to just say, like, we've been talking about this a while. I feel like we're a little stuck. Do you want me to just tell you what I think? That immediately breaks down a lot of walls and people are like, yes, tell me. And so I think in those moments, that's okay to do that. But again, it's after we've asked a lot of questions and I do have a good relationship with them and we have context built and all of those things. But yeah, I think there are tricks to also asking people if they want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
And telling them appropriately.
Yeah. I think that's really good. I was going to add that another time where this might be appropriate is, and maybe it's less advice and maybe it's more of just like hey, there's obviously times where it's like, if it's safety related, right? Like there are times where it's like, you have to just say, hey, this is what we're going to not do anymore. Or, we have to change this because this is not safe or maybe legal or whatever it is, like if there are issues there that pose a high risk to the person or other people or the organization, then it's like, no, we're not, it's not a brainstorming session, right? Like we need to go in and have a discussion and say like, this is what we're going to stop doing, this is what we're going to start doing or whatever it is. So that's another area.
Yeah, you work in a factory, you have to wear a hard hat. You don't coach somebody to wear a hard hat. You say thou shalt wear a hard hat. If thou shalt not, then thou shalt get fired. Like that's part of management. And there are moments where we all have to put that stuff out there. And so you have to be clear about that up front. And that's part of the framework that we talked about. Like, don't do that. I ran into one of the first people I ever had to fire, and it wasn't really an employee of mine, it was a contractor, was an electrician who was leaning on a propane tank at a plant smoking a cigarette. In case you didn't know, propane is flammable. You probably didn't know that smoking is not allowed anywhere in the facility that I was working at. So leaning against a propane tank, smoking a cigarette was enough information for me to know, like, you can't do that. Like, that's not okay. So I didn't go to him and say, okay, boy, I have a problem, and one of my problems is safety here, and I would like your help in solving that problem. Would you be willing to help me solve that problem? Like, you don't have to do that. There's moments where I went up to him and I just said, you're fired because we've talked about this and I question your judgment and you have to make 1,000 decisions that I don't get to see that I now believe you're going to cut corners on. And so not only you're going to leave, but I'm going to be talking to your company and like, we're going to make sure we go back over your work to make sure that you were following other rules that we had in place. Like it's like that. There's moments where you manage and you have to lean into, like Diana. I mean, like you and I work together really closely on things. Like I would say, if I was giving you feedback, and it's a little bit risky to give you the feedback right here in the podcast, I would say I want you to tell me more what to do. I would say for me personally, like I want you to tell me more. Like just tell me what you think we should do. Just say it.
Thank God. I am so ready for this. I can do this. Just kidding.
This might be, yeah, you might never see me again. This is the last episode that Don's on. I don't know. We never see Don anymore. Diana said to stay home. She took over everything he has.
You do not need to come into work tomorrow. I got this.
Excellent. That's great. Because I had other things to do, I guess. Maybe. No,
you will
actually,
also not be receiving a paycheck any longer.
Oh, I like my
Take this
job.
publicly.
I know. That's yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't have done this here. I guess we
Case
should
in
wait.
point of how to deal with a difficult employee.
Who's being difficult here? Yeah.
No. But
So,
I do love that there's coaching and there's telling, and there's a time for each one of those things. And both of those things can be effective in getting someone to do what you want them to do, but you have to use both at the right time, in the right moment, and in the right way.
yeah,
think-
and the
I
key
think-
is, do they own it or
complicated.
not, right? That's the question.
Yeah.
I always think that when we train managers, we're asking, does the other person own it? So like your friend who asked the question, if I've got somebody who's highly inefficient, my first question to that person would be, does the other person know that they're inefficient, and are they owning that? Are they trying to become more efficient? Because if they're like, man, I'm super inefficient and I would really like to work better, then you have a whole different set of tools in front of you. Then it's like, yeah, then I'll coach you and I'll train you, I'll teach you, I'll work with you, I'll guide you, all those things. If that person has no idea that they're inefficient, or if they know that they're inefficient and they don't care and they don't have any ownership in it, then you have a different set of tools. Now you're in the accountability of saying, well, we have a problem then, because we're not being productive enough as a team, and I've got to get you got to get up to this level, and you set accountability discussions. It's a different set of tools that you use, whether that the person owns it or doesn't own it.
One of our favorite bands is Fleet Foxes, and they have lyrics in one of their songs. It's easier to very good, very folksy. They're like, it's better to run to something rather than away from. And I think making management style is like run away from, run away. You know, like don't do that, stop that, and only go as far as I tell you to. Whereas when you engage people, whether it's like, hey, tell me where to go, or like, hey, together, let's do this and find some common goals. I think that's what a framework helps you do. Like, where are we going? Efficiency, that's great and fine, but only if you all have an idea of what it means. If everyone has a different expectation, is 8 hours of making art great? Is 1 hour of making art great? You know, that's different. And if I'm told 8 hours is terrible, run away from that, just do better. Wow, that's really hard. As opposed to, I love again the example, which is like, here's the information. What do you want to do? We believe that all people want to do really well. So run to it. We were with a leadership team last week with different specialty lines, and all of them said, no one's clear with our providers in any of these areas. None of our providers know for scheduling what's good and what's bad. So on the board, I just wrote out, okay, this is what you're saying, specialty, specialty, specialty. I said, what do you think is good? And their whole C-suite together said, oh, well, probably between 8 to 10 visits a day for that section. Everyone had a pretty clear idea. They just didn't know they all agreed on it, right? So when we wrote it all out, it really helped the whole room say, we're actually not that far off from our goal like we thought we were. We just need to help everyone then know what our goals actually are now. And they're way more realistic than we thought. We're off by 2 visits a day on average. Like, we can make that happen. We'll just change some processes, right? So just an example of what making a goal looks like to then build the buy-in and make it happen together.
I like that. So we've talked about, like, if you're trying to get somebody to do something, if you're trying to make somebody do something, you're trying to build a relationship with that person. Like, that's important. That's why we tell supervisors to be nice to people, to have conversations with them, to have empathy, to ask them how they're doing, to check in with them, because you're building capital with that person so that you can walk with them, so that you can help them and they can help you. That relationship is really important, and that relationship's rewarding at work anyway. That's why we tell people to communicate really clearly. Are we winning or not? To share numbers, share metrics, share KPIs, share success. What is winning? What's the score? Because humans don't like to lose. And if you know that we're losing, then our nature is to figure out, well, how do we win? How do we start to win? Or if they don't start to try to figure those things out and they want to push back, then be thankful for the clarity as a manager that you now know you have somebody on your team that wants you to lose. And the only reason that they show up every day trying to help you to lose is because you keep paying them to. So maybe you should stop that. Like, where this is not all soft. And then this idea of telling people versus asking questions. You know, asking questions is a great way to try to get other people to take ownership in the problem that's at hand. So your goal, I think, if I'm pulling all this together, is not to make somebody do something. It's how do you help them to know that they want to change the thing. That's a little bit of a difference of a goal. And that's tricky. That's harder to do. That's hard to do as a parent for a child. But what you do is you lean into those things that we all want: autonomy, and we don't like to lose. We're competitive. And you share the problem that we have, and then the other person tends to lean into that. Any other words of wisdom for our group? I think this has been a good foundational discussion for us today.
I think the only other thing that I want to add is that both parties need to believe that the other party can succeed, right? Like if you're a manager and you go into it like, oh my God, this person's so inefficient, they're gonna fail. Well, then they're gonna fail because you're not actually believing that what you're doing is helping or what you're doing is gonna get them to succeed. And I think you've signed their death certificate on that. Like it's just not gonna work. The management needs to believe more than anyone that this person can succeed with just a little bit of help. And so if you're managing someone and already believe that they're going to fail, then you're going to help them fail. And I see managers do that a lot. And I want them to know that like you have to believe that they're going to succeed and then help them succeed.
Yeah, and I think to add to the conversation we've already had is like you as a leader, this doesn't mean that you're hands off from your team and that it's like, okay, well, I'll just let them solve the problem and I'll just sit back and wait and see if they do it. It's like, no, you can still like be there. You're there to help facilitate that and then offer support and help and say, I'm not necessarily I'm going to do this for you, or I'm not going to, maybe I'm not going to tell you exactly what to do, but to our conversation before, like be there to jump in and help support and help guide them to create solutions together too if they need it, because maybe they feel stuck and they don't know where to go with it. And that's okay too. It doesn't mean you're totally absent and hands off too.
I was thinking along with that, we talk about cultures of blame and accountability a lot. There's a lot of differences and ways to maybe see, but I think one, if you're a manager and you're talking about people rather than to them, hey, how can I make so-and-so do this thing? Instead of just talking to them like, hey, here's the thing. And I think this is where we're disconnected. Help me out. Where are you? This is what I think and want. Okay. Like let's ask about it. I think that is one key difference. If you notice yourself talking about people more than to them directly, you'll save yourself and them a lot of time by getting on the same page.
Those are great observations, great tips. So hopefully you all have gotten to listen to this and gotten some great input on how can you help other people to want to do the same things that you need them to do, right? How do you manage other humans, and maybe even how to raise your kids, frankly. Like there's a lot of good tips into that. If you apply that to your children, it works pretty well. Like children are little humans, and there's a lot of things you can do if there's some autonomy. Like give them some choice within a framework of things that they're allowed to do. Hey, we're gonna go eat at this restaurant. If you want to behave at the restaurant, give them a little bit of a choice on what they order, but give them choices on what it is, right? Some within a framework, not anything you want. You can't just order an ice cream sundae, but would you like the chicken nuggets or do you want the macaroni and cheese? Like those little choices go a long way. For all people, whether they're a little child or they are an adult working in a workplace. So hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that helps everybody else. And now I guess this is going to be my final podcast as Diana takes over the company now, since I've officially asked her to do that. So I just want to thank our new king, queen, whatever we want to say, our new monarch.
What's your
Diana.
title?
Empress? What do you?
Empress. Oh, I like Empress.
So thanks all for joining us. We'll see you next time at the People Centric Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the People Centric Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new